So,
Beautiful.
we are back.
We're back for the Age of Propaganda. Is it The Age or Age?
I think it's just Age. Age of Propaganda.
Age of Propaganda Part 2.
This is Part 2.
Yes. So I think last time we covered quite a lot and we finished by touching on, was it credibility?
I believe that's where we end up, yes. I mean, if we touched on role models, we can just go over it again, I guess. But I think that's where we ended up.
Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. All right. Well, should we just pretty much just jump straight back into it?
So we'll start with the role models of persuasion.
Yes.
So this talks about how advertisers use people we look up to persuade us to buy specific products. I mean, we've been seeing this, I don't know, at least in our lifetime since we were born, with sort of Nike using sporting celebrities or sporting, I was going to say experts, or is this sporting expert? What do you call it? Like a
professional?
Yeah, sporting professional, yeah. Which you then just attribute, or you kind of subtly attribute their success to the fact they wear the specific product. So, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo wears, I don't know what he wears anymore, but he used to wear like Nike boots, and all of a sudden you think, I mean, not that he gets his powers from his shoes, but there's some sort of subtle perception that you can sort of see that, God, he's wearing them, he's scoring lots of goals. Therefore, there's got to be something about the shoes that help him a little bit at least. Or not even just that, it's more like I look up to him, I want to be like him, I want to wear what he's wearing.
Yeah. We extrapolate kind of their qualities onto the product that we're going to buy, isn't it? It's like when Michael Jordan set up basically his Nike shoe, and it just went like everyone was buying it, because you're basically seeing that this person is like the god of this sport. He represents all these different qualities, and now we're going to apply that to this product. And then no wonder everyone buys that product, We're creating that association.
I think it's spot on. I think it's quite interesting as well if you think about, remember Beats by Dr. Dre? Because he created his own line based upon, I guess you could almost say, and I didn't think it touched us in the book, but obviously if the model is relevant, the role model is relevant to the specific enterprise. So for example, obviously Ronaldo fits sport or sportswear because he plays sports, a bit like Dr. Dre would fit, headphones and audio quality because he produces music. So I guess it helps when you're in that specific area. It's a bit like, sometimes I find it a bit weird when, sporting people wear advertise like shaving, like they did like a whole thing with like Nivea with the England football team. And I was a bit like, I get why you're doing it, but at the same time, it's not as direct as obviously something specifically related to the role model or whatever.
No, precisely.
And I've also got something here as well that it doesn't just have to be like celebrities. I feel like sometimes you can be shown models of like the perfect life or the perfect, I think back here he put something like the perfect boyfriend, girlfriends being rewarded with love and affection. So by giving you specific role models you can live up to, and it doesn't just have to. So like, for example, let's say you see an advert and it's a couple using a product and then, smiling afterwards, being happy. That's also a model, like a model of behavior.
Yeah.
That's being advertised to you, like a model of like happiness that you see through other people that you then associate with the product.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just have to be like a celebrity. It can actually just be like an image of something that you would like to model in your life.
Yeah. And we were kind of saying that with influence, weren't we? And like the associations of like Coke, for example, like being on a beach and everyone's happy. And it's like, you may not necessarily know all the people in the ad, but they're going to be attractive people, which is one. And then they're also looking happy, which is a mood, a state, and their behavior, and all of that kind of adds on top to the product. It doesn't have to be someone that you actually know, but it does, like, if it has like a role model quality.
There's an example, like a specific one here. So a newly married couple discovers that the good life can be purchased on credit by watching others on television using a credit card, and they then assume, just because somebody else is doing it, they model that behavior. So, oh yeah, God, that's a really dark one. It says a teenager learns about the attractiveness of committing suicide through a news report. But that there is like statistics to show, isn't there, that when the mass media reports on suicide, the amount of suicides go up, because it shows you. I think in the next part we got here as well, is it sort of shows you that the behavior is legitimate, or like that the behavior exists, and therefore you can do it. Whereas before maybe they were on the fence.
Exactly, and like also we only know what we know. If you didn't know that behavior did exist,
that's
like in a gut, then like maybe you're suddenly made aware of that, and that's even more attractive than the last behavior you're considering for that.
Yeah, it opens up the possibility, maybe is probably the way of putting it, right? Like it's something you feel like you might want to do, but then actually seeing somebody go through with it, it makes the possibility real. And especially when it's somebody who you can sort of project yourself onto. So somebody you sort of see as similar to yourself in a way, maybe like somebody who's young doing it, you'd be like, oh, I'm young too, and they did it.
Yeah.
That's another way, I guess, it would affect.
Yeah. Well, we imitate so much, and it provides that, like you said, that opportunity to do something, and that option. It's used just so much, isn't it?
Of course.
Like to ads today, they're so terrible. Like to be fair, like they should take a leaf out of this book, or like Influence, just because how bad they are. But you'll see it, like they'll do like a shitty job of trying to implement some of these like principles, and you're just like, it's so bad. But because like think about like car adverts or beer adverts, and it's got nothing to do with a fucking car, right? Like it's got absolutely nothing, and then at the end they're like, Hyundai. Take the ride.
I know exactly what you're on about. Especially the cinema ones. They were always in the cinema when you used to go. The car ads are like, I kind of get what they're going for half the time. They're sort of going for that like sort of family life appeal. A lot of them as well kind of do like, driving through the city at night. Yeah. Like trying to give you like a real example of when you're going to use it. And sometimes they do the classic like family, pull on the family strings, like taking your family to, to work or whatever, or taking them on a trip.
Yeah.
But
I was watching one the other day of this like 1990s like ad of, I think it's like Pepsi, okay, where it was like it's set in Rome, okay, with a giant Colosseum, okay, and there are three main singers, so Britney Spears, Beyonce, and Pink, all in the like Colosseum singing so loud that it was like making all of these like drinks kind of explode or something like that, or like, and it was just like they clearly spent a fuckload of money, but they're capitalizing on this thing that, it's got so many of those properties and those qualities.
Well, I guess so. It's got all the role models in, it's basically associating them with Pepsi. But I feel like at the same time, maybe because I don't know what the other ads were like back then, but maybe if it was a bit of a strange ad, at least then it gets remembered, because sometimes the appeal or sometimes the strategy with advertising is to just, be bizarre in a way, but like, compare the meerkats, etc., that sort of appeal, or go compare. They built a bit of a a name for themselves by stretch, or just being, if you like, pitch that to your sort of your colleagues. Can you imagine just sat there, I got an idea, let's use meerkats, and they must have just been like, sorry, what?
I don't know how this gets through some of the time. I really don't, but it's weird.
You need somebody with that advertising mindset in my head, which is like, I guess understanding the value and being a bit weird.
Yeah.
Because it just, you remember it, right? Like all these car ads just mold into one because they're all the same. Like there's nothing about them. Like, actually, I guess I was gonna say, what about a car ad where they just blow it up? At least then I'd have my attention. I'd probably remember the ad, or something like they try and blow it up and it doesn't blow up, right? And then you'd be like, okay, I get it now. That's like a really safe car. But it doesn't, I guess you probably get flagged to the Advertising Standards Agency for false advertising if you couldn't blow up a car, but
that doesn't exist anymore, does it? Like that's he was kind of saying in this whole book, and actually that's like a really interesting point. He was saying, I can't remember what the fuck it's called, but basically before what was it, Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and before like kind of neoliberalism, the government would intervene if there was false, like fake advertising or false advertising. They wouldn't be able to claim things that didn't exist.
Yes.
And now it's like, you
kind of made a good point as well here, because sometimes you don't even need to make the claim, you sort of insinuate the claim. So like, for example, that blowing up the car example, to be like, this car is, you know, really durable or whatever, you probably wouldn't be flagged unless you literally explicitly say on the ad, you can't blow our car up. The rest of it, you kind of just, you imply the meaning. And, it's one of those sort of, like you love to say, plausible deniability. It's like, well, no, I wasn't trying to claim that. It's just, I just wanted to blow up a car and I thought it'd be funny if I didn't blow it up.
Yeah. You read between the lines. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It is. Sorry, we kind of got off track. We were talking about role models and now we're talking about blowing up cars, but I guess it all fits.
I like that. Sort of same. I like that segue.
Yeah.
All right. So then should we go on to what's the next one? Heuristics and
we've got heuristics. Quality. I mean, this we touched quite a lot on in influence.
Yeah.
You got stuff here like price is propaganda in the sense that it causes associations. So when people see a high price, they immediately infer quality. And at the same, and on the opposite side of things, if people see a really low price, they are more inclined to obviously think it's not so nice. It's a bit cheap.
And these are the heuristics that we use when like we just rely on certain things. It's like, you know, we rely on basic like equations for like,
because we can't know all the information, right? So you walk into a store, you're trying to figure out what's what's of value in the store, right? Or what do I want? You start using different heuristics. So one of them being like, if it's expensive, it's probably valuable. And there's another one here, which is the store image. So if you've got like a high class department store, all of a sudden everything becomes more valuable. So therefore, in my head, there must be a lot of competition to get your products in a high reputational department store, because the moment you're in that store, you're then seen as one of the products within that store, which is obviously of high value. So it's like going into sort of what's the UK equivalent? Harvey Nichols, maybe, because they always have all the big brands, don't they? Like getting a product into there almost gives you the sort of thumbs up. This is kind of luxury in comparison to, you know, I was going to say House of Fraser. House of Fraser still does have some big brands-ish. Like it does have some expensive ones, but it doesn't have like the creme de la creme where it's super expensive. So I guess it's more of like a middle ground. I'm trying to think of one which is cheap. I'm struggling. Maybe Debenhams?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like a reseller. Like I don't think there is one off the top of my head.
TK Maxx, maybe?
Possibly, but they're a different business model entirely, right? They're like we sell luxury brands at a discount type thing. But you get what I mean. It's like the image of the store itself enhances or is used as a heuristic for the quality of the product inside it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we have to be able to gauge the quality somehow, and we can't like go and like inspect the fucking cotton that it was made with and how it was made and all these different processes. We have to gauge it based on, you know, realistically, we all understand that if something's really expensive to make, then the costs are high, and so the price will probably be high. And so we kind of infer it from that, don't we? So we can be like, oh, well, you know, if it's really high price, it probably means that it's high quality. But then obviously people could take advantage of that.
Of course. And then, so you got what we just said, price, store image, and you got brand name. That's just a classic, you know?
Yeah.
I think Rory Sutherland or somebody like that made a point, which is, you know, if a brand is capable of spending lots and lots of money on their marketing, you're more likely to infer the fact the brand is big and therefore that the products are high quality, because they have to be highest quality to be that big. There's almost this like, I guess, equation you run in your brain, which is if they're super famous, they must be good at what they do, even though they might not be, right? But just by the fact that they're famous, it's a bit like that Binley Mega Chippy to a degree. Like, you know, they weren't famous on TikTok, you know. There's like a TikTok.
Oh, yes, I've heard. Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know if people are thinking, wow, this is top quality, but I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who now must be like, oh, I must have got famous for some reason other than the song. Of which it just was the song, apparently.
Yeah.
But there is a level of, you know, if it's well known, you just assume because it's well known that it's going to be good at what it's well known for.
Yeah.
Or I guess technically there's the opposite, which is when you get a reputation for being crap. Then,
that's true.
you know, it's kind of the opposite. Then people know to avoid you, which is almost then why I guess if you have a reputation for quality with a lot of other people, then people just use that as a heuristic, say that that's obviously true then, because why would people just make that up?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a lot easier to lose your quality reputation than it is to gain it, in my head, at least.
Yeah.
You know, like Nike has, let's just say it has one product it launches now, and then there's a bunch of issues with it. All of a sudden, their whole, quality ethos has just been hit. And they can't charge 90 quid, whatever they charge at the moment for a pair of shoes, which cost them about 2p to make.
Yeah. That's true. And then the next bit is the self-sell. So
I think we were talking about this just before. So this weren't we? My understanding of this is kind of letting people come to the conclusions you want. I think we spoke about this before in sort of communication books, etc. It's letting people sell themselves. It's not hard selling people. So I guess a way of thinking about it would be like the NLP technique of saying sort of imagine yourself with this product, or imagine yourself in this person's shoes, or something like that, where they then have to adopt whatever you're trying to make them believe or think in their own life by providing them with like a sort of open-ended question, so to speak. So you don't have to sell them because they're too busy thinking about how the product, if there's a product, let's just say, how the product would fit into their life. Yeah, I think I was saying to you earlier, like you could even ask something really basic, like, how can you see this product fitting in your life? And then they have to literally generate reasons because you've forced their brain to think in a way, just how could this fit in my life? And then once they've thought about it fitting within their life, they are not highly likely, but they're more inclined to obviously then maybe make a step towards purchasing, or at least be contemplating it more than they originally were.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because they filter it through all the things that they do already. It's just now they're seeing, instead of driving, a shit car, now they see themselves driving a Jaguar, so they can still see the same thing and they get comfortable with that. And it attracts them even more. And they do it all the time, especially with like cars. But yeah, it is. And there was something that you said in influence. I'm trying to remember. It was like posing something to someone so that they have to, cycle it through their life, through their day to day. Just that seems attractive. But it is a very good like technique of selling something, I would say.
Yeah, I didn't remember exactly what it was, but I think it's just the premise you're saying. It's making them come up with as many reasons why they should buy something, or many reasons how something could fit into their life. Yeah, I think I've got the example here of think up of as many positive cognitive responses about the issue as you can, and if you do happen to come up with some counter arguments, be ready to refute them. So this is like somebody giving somebody think of any positive ideas you can, and if you've got any counter arguments, find ways to refute them. It's a way of like inoculating people into not just like for a product sell, but for also like a political or belief, a political stance, or a belief. In the sense that if you make somebody already pick out the counter arguments to what they already believe, they're more inclined to then consider them. It's just be like, obviously you believe this. It's literally like the not how to have impossible conversations. What was the one about instilling doubt? I can't believe I've forgotten the name of it.
Oh, it was one of the better ones. One of the communication books, wasn't it? Like, no, it was how to.
No, it is, isn't it? It was okay. Yeah, and then because they talked about this idea of instilling doubt, so like you're trying to make somebody think through the issues. Like, what would it take for you to change your mind? Right, for example, like, do you see any flaws in what you think? Yeah, like that sort of thing where you actually open them up to thinking in a different way, or like counter arguing what they already believe.
No, absolutely. And also like with their product, right? If you thought like, if you presented it with saying, okay, what are some problems in your life that you think that this wouldn't be able to, cure? And actually it does. It's like this car actually has this ability to do this, whereas your preconceived idea was that this was a problem. Well, it's not with this product, So you're trying to sell it as the solution for how you're cycling it through your life.
I'll tell you what's really interesting to like because I've watched enough of these in the past, I kind of know how they do it. But if you're interested in this sort of stuff, go watch some like Russell Brunson, who else? Basically, a load of people who do like these webinars about selling you the sort of dream life. Like if you come to one of my courses, you're going to be like 6-figure. You know, you're going to be super rich. You're going to like be the best thing since sliced bread.
Is that Andrew Tate?
Yeah, like, honestly, it's exactly the same like sort of premise. They've been doing this for years. These people, and they always do the same thing, which is like, imagine how your life would be. Imagine how easy your life would be when you have that 6-figure income. What would you be doing? And like the whole point of that is the classic, like the NLP, which is you jump into the future mode of like your desire. You think about all the lovely things you want. And then obviously then they bring you back down to where you are now. So they'll be like, but that's obviously not where you are now. Let me help you bridge that gap.
Yeah.
But it's still the classic same thing of the self-sell. It's like they don't tell you how good your life would be. They make you imagine it because everybody has a different idea of what that will look for them, which is the whole point of the self-sell. It's you don't tell people, you let them think it out for themselves.
It's like such a blanket rule, isn't it? Because you can't apply it to every single person's context.
Because I can't know, I can't know what you desire, right?
Exactly.
I can't, so just, imagine what you desire the most all of a sudden. I can't know that, but I can. But by me projecting onto you certain things, you might reject me then because you'll be like, why is he, trying to tell me what I should want? When in reality, if I just,
it's the self-sell, isn't it? It's like you literally are selling it to yourself because no one else can. Right, they're like giving you prompts, but that's about it.
Yeah, no, exactly that. Because they don't know what you want. They make you imagine what you want, and then, if they're smart, they then try and position themselves as the person who's going to help you get what you want. It's very manipulative.
It is, isn't it?
It's very manipulative.
But I guess it could also be used to like inspire.
It could be used in a therapeutical sense, or like in a help yourself out, self-development type of sense. Like, who do you want to be? Who's the person you want to be? And then be like, how are you going to get there?
Yeah.
Like, and as long as you're actually helping them maybe figure out how they're going to get there rather than selling them something for an extortionate amount to bridge the gap. Do you get what I mean? As long as there's no motive for you in it. I don't think it's a bad thing to do if there's no massive profit motive for the person who's doing it.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is like these things are just techniques at the end of the day, right? That don't, it's like a tool at the end of the day. It could be used for good or bad. And it's like, we just happen to be talking about this in like a profit scenario, but actually it could be used for so many different things. It's just how our brain works. It's just most of the time we discuss
behavioral change as well. We're talking about products and stuff, but behavioral change, like, what behavior would most benefit you now? And then you think about it and you'd be like, how would your life change if you started doing that more? You start thinking about it. And then I'll be like, okay, well, if you pay me £10,000 a month, I can coach you there.
Oh, wonder. That's funny.
No, but you get what I'm trying to say. It's a useful technique. I do think people jump in too early and try and tell people what to think, etc., before they let them sort of, stew themselves.
Yes, precisely.
All
right, let's go on to the next one, which is vividness and persuasion. And by vividness, we mean a message that is 1, emotionally interesting, 2, concrete and imagery provoking, and 3, immediate. And I think this is just another, like, you see this all the time. It's exactly what we were talking about with, the car exploding, right? It's like, bam, it's like right in your face. It conjures up a certain emotion about it. And, you're tapping into all of these kind of things that we kind of care about or that we prioritize with our behavior and our psychology and capitalizing it.
There's another point with what you're just saying there. So like the idea of a car exploding, but then also this idea of a car shattering into a billion pieces. Like this is kind of the point being like, so a car exploding, fair enough. I mean, fine, my car broke, my car exploded, my car shattered into a million pieces. The whole point of this, with the more vivid it gets, the more, I was going to say persuasive. I guess it gets more persuasive in the sense that you remember it, and it almost sounds more exaggerated because a car exploded is pretty up there with things you're probably not going to see in your life. But a car shattering into a million pieces is also, it's pretty much the same thing, but it's more specific, more vivid, and it makes you're going to remember it more, right? they got a really good example here as well. I remember labeling this because I thought it was a perfect example of it. So there was an anti-fluoridation leaflet. What did it say? Turn in the put right. Okay, that's actually ridiculous, isn't it? So obviously it was the movement towards removing fluoride from tap water, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the leaflet consisted of a picture of a rather ugly rat, along with the inscription, "Don't let them put rat poison in your drinking water." And then the referendum to fluoridate, I don't know how to pronounce that, the water was soundly defeated. But that's just a really, potent example of how you can sort of use, vividness in the sense of like rat poison to describe something which isn't rat poison, but you could see why it could be seen as rat poison, right? Like it's a chemical, and therefore people assume chemicals. I mean, everything's a bloody chemical, right? If you want to be like that, but people can see that it could be rat poison, and the specific use of that, has obviously changed a lot of people's minds because it's so powerful. I guess you could say, like, such a powerful way of positioning that argument.
Yeah. Well, like, our memory is predominantly based on visual cue, like visual stimuli, isn't it? So you're taking something that is literally vivid. So in this case, an ugly rat, right? And now we also don't like rats as humans because we have this association to them as with like disease and dirt and all this kind of stuff. And so then we're applying that to something that we do care about, in this case, which is water. Okay. Mm-hmm. And we like to be able to drink clean water. And so everything is about either like, it being really vivid. Like, imagine drinking water that a rat has just been in. Or, it's all like conjuring up that image that's so memorable that even if
and it's also disgusting as well, isn't it? It's like a visceral feeling of disgust when you think about it.
And even if it's not like legit, okay, because they wouldn't be putting rat poison in your water. The thing is that when you're making a decision, that's a split-second decision, and you're not engaging like your rational brain, you're going to be like, oh, that water's got rats in it. Like, it's used to make you, to influence your like split decision. It makes that like really vivid. And you see this quite a lot as well.
No, you do. It reminds me a bit of the COVID. Remember, we talked about the COVID ploy, which is like, look her in the eyes if you just killed this person.
Yeah.
That's
if you don't wear a mask. Yeah.
And once again, it's not saying that people who didn't wear masks didn't kill people. It's just more like the fact that you had to like make it a frail older woman and then put me in a position where you're making me feel super guilty. Yeah. When we're outside, when the science was suggesting even being outside, you didn't need to wear masks, but that's all up for debate anyway. But it's just more the fact it was such a visceral, vivid example of like the consequences of your actions. But it was more of like an extreme example, which is why I think it's a bit like this rat poison. It's extreme rather than what's most likely.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's done to try and change your behavior.
Yes, 100%.
It's like, in this, you vote for not having rat poison in your water. And the other is like to make sure you wear a mask.
Make sure you comply with the regulations.
Changes your emotions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then also the problem with it is then you associate people who choose not to listen to this argument that they're like bad. So like, oh my God, you want rat poison in our water. You didn't vote to remove the fluoride or whatever.
Yeah.
It's very divisive. Very divisive.
Yes.
So before we move on to the next bit, I've got a little bit here about why vivid appeals work. I mean, we kind of discussed why anyway, but so firstly, vivid information attracts attention. So it helps the communication stand out in a message dense environment. Second, vividness can make the information more concrete and personal. So, I mean, as you can see, more concrete would be the fact it's poison. Finally, a vivid presentation can make the material more memorable. This is especially important if we do not reach an immediate conclusion, but base our later judgments on the information that readily comes to mind. That's a good point, actually. Like, let's just say you see the fluoride leaflet, let's just say with the rat poison, you kind of ignore it at the time, and then you'll go to dinner with somebody and somebody brings up fluoride. You don't know much about fluoride. You never have been interested in it, but because the first thing that comes to your mind is rat poison, you're more likely to jump into the conversation and be like, I can't believe they're putting rat poison in our
it will be a negative attitude towards it.
Yes, no, exactly that, because it's the only touch point I guess you might have had with the specific topic.
Yeah.
Like for example, let's just say I didn't have, until I don't actually know too much about fluoride now thinking about it, but like if I'd seen that before anything, I would equally just be of the opinion that, oh God, it's really it's dangerous, it's poison, because I have nothing else to counter argue against it in my brain. It's just,
and the thing is that also, even if you can't remember the specifics about that ad about fluoride, it's the residual emotion that counts, isn't it? It's either going to be positive or negative.
No, it is that.
And in this 100%. Case, you've got this negative attitude. So even if like you're at dinner and someone brings up fluoride and you can't even remember that fucking rat example, you might still have a negative inclination towards it.
You'll get a sense as bad. You'll just get a sense within you that it's not right. You'll be like, I didn't feel right about fluoride.
We don't remember facts and figures. Our brains aren't supposed to remember that stuff. It's just all too intricate for us.
Of course.
But we do base our behavior is based on our emotions, and that is the residual stuff that stays. Whereas like if you were to read another article about fluoride and how good it is, then you'd probably override that first one. Maybe,
especially if the article was written by somebody wearing a lab coat and you saw the picture
exactly.
And it's just, it's funny how we all work, right?
Mate, it is. It's just a little cycle. We're all going back and forth.
Yeah.
Oh God. Should we go on to the next bit?
Yes.
So this is repetition and persuasion, which is, I would say, like when someone talks to me about like propaganda or like influencing people, I would say repetition is one of the key things that just comes to mind when I think about it. I think it's also because like of Joseph Goebbels and what he said. And I think they give an example.
And he almost made propaganda famous in a weird sense because he was like the chief propaganda minister, right? Like a lot of the dirty connotations of propaganda come originally from him. And he was, a big believer in, repeating things can allow people to believe things which aren't true. I can't remember if it's in this book or not, where he talks about like, I can make somebody believe a circle is a triangle or something, or like a square is a circle, if you just repeated it enough times, because essentially he's got a point, which is just a word at the end of the day and a concept. And if you just manage to make sure everybody now agrees that a circle is a square, then the circle is now a square, because everybody believes it is that now.
Yeah.
So he was onto something there with the idea of, repeating something again and again and again, to getting people to come to like a consensus on it.
No, absolutely. And it makes it like familiar, doesn't it? And it's once again, it's like tapping into that kind of tribal mentality, or that like social proof, or social reputation. Because if everyone else is agreeing that a circle is actually a square, then are you going to be the one person to be like, well, actually, I don't believe that?
Well, they've proven this time and time again, haven't they? With like those experiments where, oh God, what was the experiment? Was it they get up and leave? No, that was it. It was something like they showed everybody in the experiment, like 3 triangles, and this is definitely not the right thing, but it's the concept's the same. And then they go, how many triangles are there? And then when they all say it out loud, like 9 of them say there's 2. And the one person
it's the lines, isn't it? It's I want to say his name is Solomon Ash.
Okay.
And he does it. He's like there are 2 lines. Yes. And one of them is definitely shorter than the other.
Yes.
And they're like, is this the same length as that? And 9 of them go like, yes. And then the other person's like, yes. Like,
the point being the same, which is when there's a group consensus of what's true around you, you conform to the group, because you don't want to be I guess the one way of putting it is you doubt your own judgment, because you're like, how can 9 other people be wrong?
Yeah.
Like it's weird to think that, for example, right, if everybody you knew and loved suddenly thought you were crazy, you would start thinking you're crazy over time, because they influence your own self-perception, because you have to use them to inform yourself of yourself. So if everybody just started reacting like everything you said was absolutely crazy, you'd be like, you become schizophrenic, I reckon. You could probably mess with
it's like gaslighting, isn't it? It's like destabilizing their reality.
Yeah, on an extreme level,
Yeah. And it's because at the end of the day, does truth really matter to us rather than survival? Survival for us is like fitting into a group. Mm-hmm. But like, truth is okay. Yeah. If there's like an objective truth out there, then fine. But from like a scientific point of view, you could say, okay, well, that line is actually, that one is smaller than that one. But from a group mentality, it doesn't mean
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't make a difference. What is truth in that regard, right?
The question becomes less about the truth, and it becomes more about embarrassment and not sticking out, right? So the question originally was, which is longer, and then the question then becomes like, once everybody else has said they're the same or whatever, or one's longer than the other, the question then becomes, it changes meaning for you. It's now not answering it objectively. It's like, how can I make myself look not crazy?
Yeah.
Or how can I make myself look like I've, you just start doubting, I guess, at that point, didn't you? Just like, oh, well, if everybody else has put that answer, like, why should I be the one who puts the other one? Like, am I just the only person who can see the world? I reckon if you did that forever, you end up with a massive God complex where you think you're the only person who can see the world.
But actually, it's interesting because we know people, like everyone knows people, where they walk into the room and they're so confident about a fact that they just stay with the confidence rather than the group being like, oh, that's not wrong. And then people start to like conform and they'll be like, actually, maybe that's legit, right?
There is some level to that, like the confidence game, right? It's the whole idea of, if you act confidently, people then follow you because they're like, he must know something I don't.
Precisely. Why would he be willing to put his reputation on the line otherwise, right?
Yeah. That's also crazy how it works like that, because you're right. Just somebody there was a quote. It must have been, I think it might be propaganda, when he was talking about Hitler. And he's talking about all these like world leaders, and he was like, part of their part of the mania of them is they were just so confident with everything they said. People just didn't know like how to like not believe them. And he was like part of their part of the reason why they were so successful was just their sort of like commitment to what they believed, and it just made everybody else believe it, right? Because they were just like so convinced of their own like ideas that everybody else just was like, oh my God, like there has to be a reason he's spouting this stuff, because it has there has to be something he knows we don't. But
it's crazy. So
kind of segue
I don't know. It's very topical with Hitler and all that.
Yeah,
because they were fanatical about it, weren't they?
Yeah. No, you're right. And it's like the repetition, like repeating yourself again and again and again will then eventually convince people to a degree, unless of course you're doing it in a mental asylum where you're straitjacketed, and then it might be slightly different. So a quote by Goebbels is, propaganda must therefore always be essentially simple and repetitious. In the long run, only he will achieve basic results in influencing public opinion, who is able to reduce problems to the simplest terms and who has the courage to keep forever repeating them in this simplified form, despite the objections of intellectuals. So as you can see, that's his kind of philosophy with his propaganda, which is, keep it simple and repeat it too many times.
But also it's interesting that he mentions the courage to do it, right? Because he clearly sees that, if you have the commitment and if you back yourself and you keep saying the same thing, a lot of people will keep conforming.
But I think... the courage is also the courage to the ideology, no? Like in my head, it's the courage to continue on to the belief that this is for the greater good. Do you kind of get what I mean? Like he believes in that ideology of like they were serving a greater purpose, and therefore it's the courage to serve this greater idea.
Well, think about a more topical example would be that, what is it? The whole like gender issue at the moment, you know, and what's a woman? There's like a woman who used to have who has, what is it? How do they define it? It's like the older version of a woman is like a woman who has
it's not gender dysphoria, is it?
No. It's the new definition of what a woman is. My point being is in like, we know what sex is. There is like an X and Y chromosome, and yet lots of people are starting to doubt that because there's this ideology going around, and more people are jumping on board. Do you get what I mean? Because they're very convicted towards it, their ideology.
Also, I think, interestingly enough, it's kind of a segue, and we probably shouldn't get onto it, but that a lot of that's also deduced from Status. Remember the Status games, Will Storr? He talks about how ideologies also become about like, oh, I'm going to play that game. I'm going to start, espousing this ideology because that gains me status within my group. If I can start espousing this too, I'm going to gain status among my peers because I'm with them in this battle for this this battle for equality, diversity. It's that's it.
Yeah, let's not go down that route. Otherwise, we will be talking for ages. Okay, so then the next bit is how advertisers use repetition. I thought it was quite interesting, actually, because they were basically saying that although repetition is good, repetition when like it can sometimes become tedious and annoying depending on like the ad. So I would give an example, like the Go Compare ads. We're so used to their like, their jingle. Okay. And the like type of ad that they do that it just gets so boring that as soon as it comes on, you like muting it, right? Because it's tedious and it's boring.
But there is also like a level which he's saying there where it's like you can also make it not tedious at the start, where if you start changing, like the first Go Compare was like, okay, that's funny. They did a couple more, right? And then it was like they did a couple more where they changed it, but they were still the same like principle. And that was also quite funny, right? That's half the reason why I got the reputation, a bit like the Compare the Meerkat. But the fact they're still doing it now is where what you're trying to say, right? Where there's actually to the point now where it's worn out. Like the joke's gone. Like it was funny. Exactly. It was good. And now it's like you've lost it. You've lost the magic.
Yeah, no, precisely. And they call this the wear out effect. Yeah. And I thought it was quite interesting because they were saying that advertisers will try to diminish the wear out effect by still using repetition, but repetition with variation. So there is still this element of novelty, but with this like comfort of like the repetition, the thing that we know, right? And I think that kind of duality works quite well. And like you just said, like, they made the first jingle, everyone loved it. Then they knew that jingle, that's like comfortable and that's repeated loads, but in different contexts, or they'll change it slightly.
I think another part is, so repeating the jingle is obviously quite important in my head to get that sort of straight up association to the jingle, to the noise, to the music, or whatever you want to call it. But I think another point for advertising in general is repeating the same underlying message, let's just say. Yeah. So for example, when he's talking about the Marlboro Man, the whole point was to present the symbol of like masculinity to a degree. Yeah. It was like a symbol of like the men I think they did one for the women as well afterwards, but a symbol for like the aspirations of somebody who smokes. And then by using the same symbol but just changing the context, they allowed for the fact that they still conveyed the symbol that they wanted to convey to the customers, but they changed it in a way that allows people to not get bored. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because it's like, for an advertiser, if you want to like convince people of something, let's just say it's McDonald's, back in the day, they wanted to convince people that, McDonald's was, nice and cheap or whatever, let's just say, they would not want to remove that like underlying message from their advertising, but they would want to portray it in more different or creative ways. Yeah. So I think that's part of the point here. It's like you always try and repeat the underlying message, but you present it in different ways to avoid the wear out of people being like, I've heard this before.
Yeah.
I guess this is kind of like where you get people like remix songs, right, to a degree. Mm-hmm. It's not exactly the same, but it's like if you do a remix, you kind of like, I kind of know the song, but it's also you don't at the same time. Yeah. So it's a bit. So like we talked about this before on another podcast, and I can't remember what book, but it's like this subtle like novelty effect that gets people back in.
Yeah. I can't remember. But yeah.
What do we have next? Oh, you say changing people's minds with dissonance.
Yes. So the greater the discrepancy, the greater the discomfort for the members of the audience. But this does not necessarily mean the members of an audience will change their opinion. There are at least 4 ways in which the members of an audience can reduce their discomfort.
So for context, this is more, so when it says the greater the discrepancy, the greater the discomfort, it's talking about like an idea. So the greater the discrepancy of something that's been said to what you believe to be true, the greater the pain. So if you believe something to be absolutely categorically fact, and somebody comes up on stage or wherever it is and says something to you which you literally cannot possibly believe, you have greater discomfort than somebody who kind of says something middle ground. But continue.
No, because it's closer to your belief, isn't it? And it's going to push it otherwise, because you're going to double down. If you're so far away that you couldn't actually end up accepting what this person is saying on the stage, then you're probably going to double down your own belief. And so, it says here that there are 4 ways to reduce this kind of psychological tension or discomfort. And one of them is they can change their opinion. But once again, it depends.
The most unlikely in my head.
The most unlikely. And I think it depends, like, how much discrepancy there is, right? Like, if you're very new to the topic and
if it's unrefutable evidence, like if it's like absolutely irrefutable, like.
But even then, it's interesting because, like, how many times do we see people literally witness things and experience things, and then they still double down on their previous belief rather than the actual reality of the situation?
It's more common than it is uncommon. So
it's crazy. And then number 2, they can induce the communicator to change his or her opinion. So basically just, debating and trying to convince the actual communicator. Then number 3, they can seek support for their original opinion by finding other people who share their views in spite of what the communicator says. So that's basically like confirmation bias, isn't it? It's like
it's going to a tribe for support, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because we want to reduce that psychological tension. And this is that way, because then we feel comfortable. Everyone's like, no, this is a legit belief.
Yeah, I'll give you an absolute classic of this because I find myself doing it a lot. Let's just say you ever end up in a state of conflict or state of something or state of business where somebody says something to you and says like, what you just did is wrong. Let's just say, do you or do you not then go and speak to your close friends about the situation to find out? And you obviously always, because I always do it, not change the truth, but you position the whole story in a way where you're the hero, they're the villain. And then you ask people to confirm, what they think of it. And as far as I'm concerned, the way people always position themselves, it's almost impossible to ever be like, oh no, you're in the wrong. Yeah. It's very rare because nobody's willing to possibly put their hands up and be like, oh, by the way, like this did happen, but I did do this. You kind of mean it.
And also, like you said, they're your friends, right?
Yeah, of course.
You could be talking about someone you bumped into in the middle of the street, and they don't know that person, so they don't have no allegiance.
No,
to
you're
them.
right. And then the only model that they have of the person is what you tell them, and therefore, if you're like, oh, I met this person, he said this and this, I can't believe he said that, and they'd be like, oh, why did he say that? That's crazy. Yeah. But the reality is, like 2 years ago, you and him got in a scrap or something. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
There's more context behind it. Yeah, but I thought that one was quite funny because I think
it's actually
everybody who's listening can probably, I would say, relate to it in some form or another. Going to your friends or your significant other to like reaffirm your interpretation of what's just happened.
And it is interesting you saying that, like we frame it in a way that puts us in a good light.
Yeah, no. Because I know I do it, I know everybody else is doing it, and therefore, when people come to you, just like, yeah, fair enough, like it. But the thing is, you're never going to be like, oh yeah, I'm the villain.
No,
are you? Or like, but like, the problem is, it's never that easy, is it? Either we've spoke about this. It's not black or white.
It's complexity.
You don't know the other person's side either, do you? You don't. Yeah. If you haven't taken up with them either, so you just But it's funny.
Yeah, it's funny. And then I think the number 4, the last one, so they can derogate the communicator, convince themselves the communicator is stupid or immoral, and thereby invalidate that person's position.
Absolutely, like the most common one in this day and age.
Yeah. Yes. Think about it, like actually on like a more societal level of people or on certain platforms being deplatformed and cancelled straight away without being able to debate. And that's something that Joe Rogan talks about a lot, like not even being able to be given the chance to debate or argue. They're just cancelled straight away, or they're like attributed certain labels, and we've talked about that loads, like, oh, he's a Trump supporter, blah blah, what does he know, everything like that. It's all about making them look stupid or like
and this is the perfect segue into the next part, which is Protagoras' ideal. Like you're saying, like in this day and age, you're not even allowed the opportunity to debate or to even like, voice an opinion because it's, right or wrong these days. And the Protagoras' ideal comes from the idea that the Greeks possessed an ideal, and the sophist Protagoras believed that there are two sides to every issue. So this is talking more about how the Greeks kind of, I was going to say fetishized, but it's not the right word. Maybe it is like debate, two-sided arguments. They really enjoyed watching people battle it out in a battle of ideas.
Yeah.
And what we just saying, you don't find it in this sort of day and age with mass media. So, the typical ad is a one-sided ad that consists of little information and much sort of exaggerated claims to the point here, like this pain reliever is the gentlest, the fastest, the best. This brand will make you lose fat the fastest. You can't beat the best taste of this brand. But the reality is, right, if you were living in a Protagoras ideal society, you would have to debate somebody who would then be like, what do you mean by fastest?
Yeah. No, precisely.
What do you mean fastest? Like, what do you mean by gentlest?
Yeah.
What do you mean by you can't beat the taste? Like,
and was it
taste? What do we all different taste buds? Do people like different types of tastes?
Yeah.
So like, the point being here, we've gone so far from like this idea of like valuing truth and battles of ideas to now we just enjoy the fluff. We just enjoy who can make the most exaggerated claims. But yeah.
And that's the thing is like, if you pushed it, it would technically be right, but it's also not technically like it is also like kind of technically wrong, or it's like they've skewed it loads. Like wasn't one of the things that it was saying in this is like, it's the fastest, but it's like every like drug out there does it in the same exact speed.
Yes, and then it's like, arguable that it is the fastest because it's the fastest among others. No, I remember that.
No, exactly. So it's and then they're just framing it in a certain light, aren't they?
And then it becomes. I still remember it was really interesting. I think this is Rory Suffern's point with sort of like painkillers, and it's this idea that he knows he's a sucker for it, even though he knows like the psychology behind it. But it's like if a painkiller is more expensive, it works better on you because of placebo. But also, for example, Nurofen started branding stuff as like Nurofen Express. They also started doing like Nurofen headaches, Nurofen stomach aches. But the reality is the substance itself was the same, but they tried to claim it was targeted because technically it affects stomach aches and technically it affects headaches. By targeting it, right, they increase sales. Because if you think about it, the psychology of somebody going in is, I've got a headache. Oh, this one's specifically for headaches. They're all specifically for headaches. And you just then go, okay, I'll take this one. And it's the same with the stomach aches. They're all specifically for pain. But it's amazing how like you can get away with it in my head because it is like blatant lying, blatant stretching of the truth. Let's just say.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
But it's, I remember reading it. I was thinking that's so smart. It's really smart. I have to say, when I see it, I'm like, fair enough.
Just put in the wrong direction. So then the next point basically builds on this. So like, can two-sided arguments be more persuasive? So is it possible ever for a two-sided argument to be more persuasive than a one-sided message? Or put more bluntly, what factors make a one-sided argument so effective that they seem to be the tactic of choice for most modern propagandists? I thought this one was quite an interesting one, actually, from what I can remember, because it was basically saying exactly what we were talking about before. If you're here on the spectrum of whatever this concept is, and someone says something really outrageous, okay, then you're going to go away and double down on your belief. Whereas, like, if they said something that was right next to your kind of belief, you'd be more inclined to like change it slightly.
Yeah, to move. Yeah.
And I think that's what he was kind of tapping in with this, I thought.
Yeah, he also mentioned some interesting points, which is, I think we spoke about this on the last podcast or before. So, like, the two-sided argument kind of works better for people who have some level of familiarity with the subject at hand. Let's just say it was somebody trying to convince a doctor of something. They are way more inclined to hear, like, the alternatives to something than a blatant, like, this is better. Like, somebody who knows more about a subject, it's going to be harder to be convinced by a blatant sort of one-sided, this is like, a hyperbole. Let's just say somebody just goes, this is the best way. Somebody's, I was going to say educated, but it's not that educated in the matter of subject. But you made a good point here as well, that if you weigh up two sides, you can persuade through character or persuade through the fact that you're coming across as more honest because you're showing that you're willing to pay attention to or bring to people's attention the alternatives. Which is quite interesting because that's like if somebody basically was like thinking, back to these influence questions of like, can I trust this person? If they start with a two-sided argument, or with the classic, they start with, maybe even the argument against him first, you're more likely to then be like, this person's trustworthy, and therefore more likely to listen to this person. But then the exact caveat is, once you give them the arguments, you've given them the arguments against their position. And if they can think of anything to increase that argument or another point to add to it, then you've kind of, I was going to say fucked yourself, but you haven't, but you put yourself in a position that's harder to come back from.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think we perceive it as though they're putting all their cards out, right? They're putting all their cards down. And so we're like, oh, that looks honest. But realistically, they're picking and choosing which cards to show. It's just they're showing more cards than most people do, because they would they'll show like an argument against their product, but then they'll have the card that trumps that argument, and so they're showing you it's like, oh yeah, this does have a problem, but actually, exactly.
But this is also where like the point, so it kind of backfires to those that try and game the system, because then people come up with even stronger counter arguments. So like if you present an argument, they'd be like, yeah, that's kind of true, but what you just said, oh wait, but there's another point here that you completely missed. The point being here that, if you present it maybe disingenuously, you're more likely to be caught out by people who are now going to consider the negatives. But once again, it's kind of one of the things I got from this book as well, is it kind of tries to give you like principles of when an argument's more effective, when it's more persuasive. But once again, everybody's different, so this is never going to work 100% of the time. You can't just walk up and give a two-sided argument and expect everybody to listen to you. It's the classic like pick your audience, I wonder if it's like interesting where like, once again, if you're less inclined to know a subject matter, you're more inclined to listen to like hyperbole, and therefore like, or people who just exaggerate claims, and therefore that's why there's like that classic reputation of like Trump appealing to people who don't know as much, because at the end of the day, he's just speaking in massive generalizations, exaggerations all the time, which just fit better to people who haven't considered that what he might be saying is wrong, or that there's any counter arguments.
I think absolutely. I think they're more easily won over by hyperbole and by like surface level things like rhetoric, like character, right? Because it's like, it doesn't really matter. You don't have anything else that can combat it, because you don't know anything else on the subject anyway. So if you like the speaker, there's
a level where I'm starting to think character like trumps all, to a degree, like in an argument for some people, not all, but like, this person could be the greatest mind ever, but if he's like a massive pedophile, like, he's not coming back. Do you get what I mean? Like,
it's true.
I think for most people, character does trump all to a degree. Like if you're, your whole reputation can be built up over many years, and then people find out you've done some dodgy things in your past, and you're all of a sudden, fall from grace.
And I think that's pretty much what we're seeing a lot of, isn't it? This like cancel culture, where we go back like 15 years ago when someone said something online that was like really like, first of all, it was acceptable in the time, but also it wasn't that bad. And it's like, then they get cancelled. It's like, for instance, take Kevin Hart, who was cancelled from doing the Oscars, right? Because he said something like 10 years ago that sounded like slightly homophobic. And it was just like, well, why are you holding them to a standard from 10 years ago?
Yeah.
It was a completely different time. It's fucking
and also people change, right? Like it's not, people aren't static beings, people are always constantly changing, and you might, I just find it so cutthroat, the whole business, where they're like, they just like, they like ridicule each other. Like one of their friends who they've been friends with all their life comes out with something 10 years ago, and publicly they'll be like, no, I'm not friends with him anymore. It's just like, wow.
It's pretty disgusting, I think.
It's a bit like, were we speaking about the J.K. Rowling thing and how the Harry Potter characters like disowned? I feel like that's also like a massive travesty. Like to disown somebody who's provided you with pretty much everything, your whole like career leap
everything. Like those three don't have a proper career. Like none of them are like that big actors, and like she gave everything to them, and I thought that was a pretty like pretty disgusting to just leave the
drop it like it's hot.
Yeah.
In the famous word of Snoop Dogg.
Yeah. But it is like, it is character because we just extrapolate everything from people's character to whatever they're talking about.
That's another example, I guess, of like where propaganda comes in, isn't it? Like, it's never really completely rational. It's always like, what are this person's intentions? Can I trust this person? I think it was Kahneman who says something like that, where it's like, these are the substitute questions. So like, instead of thinking, so let's just say we're talking about a topic which is, way above our heads, like running an economy, because that shit is not easy, as we can see. We then substitute those questions for like easier ones. And the easier one will be like, do I like this person? Or like, do I think this person is capable of running the economy? Because I don't know what it takes. So I substitute the question to like, can I trust this person to do it? I don't know if you ever remember that point he made. Was like you substitute it.
I think that's really good, actually, because at the end of the day, whatever the content is, put that aside. It's like, do I trust what this person is saying or not? It's like, can I trust whatever this person is saying? Because if not, then I'm not going to listen to anything. And I think I've mentioned this before, but like, I remember listening to a podcast of Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray, and he said this about like the political polarization, and that the issue is that both sides don't trust each other. So one could be speaking be a fucking genius, but no one's going to listen because they just think whatever you're going to say, I don't trust it. Right?
It's why, literally, if anybody who was really highly left-leaning even heard us mention the word Jordan Peterson, they'd immediately just turn off this podcast and be like, oh, we're not listening to these two, because they've listened to Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson's the enemy. It's like, we can't trust anything he says. And therefore, if they're quoting anything he says, it's not to be trusted. It's like, what a world we live in.
It is nuts. And it is like, I can see why it sounds, I don't know, very like fluffy, but I can see why a lot of people say like trust and love like at the core of everything.
Yeah.
Because if you can't trust and you can't trust the love, then like, what the fuck are you doing?
Then you're living, like, as the Peterson would probably say, you're living in hell. If you can't trust anything, you are in a state of like absolute paranoia at all times. Therefore, you're living in some state of what you could say is real life hell, because nothing can be trusted. Everything's a lie. Everything's, out to get you.
And that's the thing, is like, we're social animals. So we're interdependent. We have to rely on others, and we should be able to rely on people by trusting them. Right. And that is the thing that people at the end of the day take advantage of. Like, we're all animals, which is but that's what we take advantage of. And so no wonder everyone is like got their fucking backs up against the wall. It's like, oh, I don't know if I should trust you. I don't know. I don't want to listen to whatever you're saying. It's because think about how many times people just.
We live in an age where like lies and exaggerations are like normalized. Not even selfishness. Not even direct lies. Yeah, and selfishness is incentivized. But it's definitely for me the like stretching of the truth, because it's not always direct lies. It's a bit like this Nurofen stuff, and it's like defensible, but you can see it being done, and therefore other people who get it will be like, oh well, why don't I do that? Because everybody else is doing it. And you basically normalize this culture. Everybody's in it for themselves, because nobody's thinking about higher values, right? And this is back to what you're saying.
Precisely.
I don't see too much wrong with the incentivization of making people being self-interested, as long as you can pull back the reins, which is part of what the legal system's for. But when you let go of the reins, back in like neoliberalism, etc., right, then you cause some serious distrust, because you can't trust anybody, because nobody's controlling the people from like themselves, right? Because they're all willing to lie.
There's no line to exaggerate.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, so. Yeah, a lot. Maybe we're going to struggle to get through. I think we might have to do part 3 at this point.
Oh my God, bloody hell. So the next bit is fear and persuasion. And I think this is another one that like just comes to mind whenever I think of propaganda or influences to fear. Like, I'm maybe a bit like, very skeptical of the government and everything, but I do think that fear is used quite a lot to influence people.
I'm trying to look at here what I got exactly. I mean, obviously, like, I guess the crux of it is fear is very persuasive. Before we go into any other stuff, I think I've got notes here for saying, okay, about saying experimental data overwhelmingly suggests that all other things being equal, the more frightened a person is by communication, the more likely he or she is able to take positive preventative action. Is it true for all people? It is not. So once again, we're dealing with something that's percentage based. Is like if fear appeal is more likely to do this, but it's not 100% guaranteed.
Yeah.
And I think this is to do with stuff like, if I remember correctly, because he's talking about preventative action, it's like scaring people into, thinking they're going to get lung cancer from smoking, right? Like, if you think about it, the whole rationale for having the, cancerous lungs on the smoking package is literally a fear-based propaganda appeal to try and stop people from smoking.
Yeah.
Which also is interesting because it obviously doesn't work for some people. And if anything, I've come to the conclusion where it actually influences people who don't smoke more, because the people who don't smoke at all, don't get it. So when they see the pictures, they're like, why the hell would you do that to yourself?
Yeah.
So it's almost doing the worst. It's almost making it worse to a degree, because the people who smoke obviously can't help themselves because they're like addicted. And the people who don't smoke are like, you're idiots. They're literally showing you that you're going to die. On the package, and you're still doing it, which creates like it creates a culture of like smoking negativity, which I guess it should be at the end of the day, because it's not good for you. But it does create a culture where people are like shun people who smoke to a degree, which I find is quite interesting, because like it's almost gone past the objective and it's made it worse for the people who smoke, because then they might guilt smoke out of the fact that people ridicule them for it. So
and it is that, like, once again, it's going back to, if you believe in smoking, or the effect for it is so good for you, then you're going to double down. Yeah. Because this is like an extreme no, right? It's not like it's close to your belief being like, okay, well, maybe if you have like one now and then, it's like, no, don't fucking smoke, you're going to die of cancer. It's so extreme that like people might double down and be like, nah.
It is. I guess some people also have that like complex of like, it's not going to happen to me. What else did I put down here then? So we got.
I think the biggest thing that I found was that the combination of fear, arousal, and specific instructions produced the best results.
Yes. Okay, I can see why you got that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like you're scaring someone into a state where they're like, "Oh my god, what the fuck do I do?" And then you're providing really clear instructions. Because if these instructions are vague, then I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do. I'm just going to rely on probably copying people or whatnot.
You're also making a really good point, because it's at that point of like peak scaredness, or peak, like I was going to say uncertainty, but it's more scaredness, and then uncertainty of what to do with their frightened state, where they're most susceptible, I guess, to these instructions. Like, you're right. It's like, fuck, like I'm going to get, lung cancer. What do I do? It's like, well, go to the clinic, nicotine patches or whatever. That's something they should probably be putting on the packages then. Scare people with it, and then be like alternatives, or they probably do. Actually, I've never inspected a package. They probably even put like call a clinic. I genuinely, they might do. I wouldn't be surprised.
But that is very key, because you're providing the solution. And like we read like the shock doctrine, it's the whole idea of like, from a more malicious point of view, it's like capitalizing on a crisis, making it seem worse, and then providing a solution that's in your incentive. It's like there's a earthquake, all these places are destroyed, so you provide them with a solution of rebuilding schools, but you have like 80% of the company. It gets used more and more. And I think the problem is that because it gets used more and more, it's like the world seems like it's on fire all the fucking time, because every single crisis is amplified, or even things that weren't a crisis are turned into a crisis. It's like, this might sound very controversial, but the things like that were happening over lockdown, some of the social movements, for instance, like the poor Sarah Everard case, it was a woman was murdered, but the stats were very like on the decline, but then it was turned into such a big thing that it made it seem like it was happening all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was a crisis. Like, there are men going out, like murdering women all the time, and that men are at fault. And it's like, well, you completely, jumped on the bandwagon here and made it a crisis. And it's not really about Sarah Everard anymore. It's about attacking men about you know?
Yeah.
And I think you start to see that more and more because it's like, oh, it's an opportunity. We can jump on it. And then once you jump on it, hear the solution.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess people have started to realize that great change happens at moments of, revolution, moments of, peak collective anxiety around a specific issue, right? It's because, I guess, in the sense it's been brought to the public's consciousness and therefore they're scared and they need solutions. Do you know what I mean? It's like people exaggerate the situation to therefore, promote their agenda, right? A bit like we said with the shock doctrine, going into, I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was Venezuela, like going in and being like, your economy's fucked. You're going to, like, all your people you're going to have a revolution on your hands. But if you let us come in and, buy all your corporations and hold your economy up afloat, you're going to survive. And then it's just, crazy.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous.
Crazy. But you can see why it works, right? It's like you said, it's this idea of, being shocked, and looking for a solution to the situation you find yourself in, right?
Yeah.
What else do we have here?
I think on that, so like he says that there are four. What is it? Is there like 4 ways that fear appeal is most effective?
Parts which makes it effective.
And we talked about like how it scares people into like a certain state of fear, and then they offer these like specific recommendations. But then I think what was interesting is that he also mentioned that if it's perceived as effective, right? So if going back to this earthquake idea, I suggest that, these buildings are destroyed, but you could build schools now. Like that sounds legit, right? It sounds like it's going to be effective, that it's going to help the economy. It's going to help all these people get back to school, everything like that. So it's perceived as effective.
Yeah.
But we can change how people perceive things. Just read this fucking book.
Ooh. Yeah. And then number 4, which is quite interesting. So the message recipient believes that he or she can perform the recommended action, which I find quite interesting as well, because it also works with sales, because it's like you've got this massive problem. Like, think about it. It's almost similar to the self-sell to a degree. Can you imagine the persuasion ability of somebody who could basically make you now believe you have a problem? So like basically, describe your situation being like, oh my God, like in comparison to what you could be, you're not saying you're nothing. There's a problem here. And they're like, fucking hell. Like I'm not where I could be. I'm like in a midlife rut. They describe me. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Yeah. And they come in with this is specifically what you need to do. And then they give you easy ways to do it, such as like, give me your money and I would do it on credit. Do you got it? Like they then can do it because it's like you've given them a solution to it. I know it's slightly different to this whole thing, but it kind of reminds me as well as a bit like the COVID stuff as well. It's like specific actions, wear a mask. It's like, who can't, like, it's not hard to wear a bloody mask, right? Do you get what I mean? It's an easy thing. And I find it really interesting, specifically from moving back down to the sort of more commercial side of things. It's this idea of making things easy via credit as well. Like, you can split your payments. You don't have to do the opportunity is so big for you. You're like, I remember seeing it with the I went ages ago to like a real estate conference. I don't know if I ever told you about it. And it was like, when I was there, it was like a massive like pitch, like a guy, and I was in a room with like with a bunch of other people, and they were basically promoting courses that were like £1,000 to £2,000 each one. And they were saying stuff like, if you don't have enough money, get your credit card out. Don't worry, they'll help you take it. The money they take credit card at the back, and they also, from what I believed at the time, they paid actors to like get up and run to the back, and then loads of people started running to the back and like not push each other. Do you know what I mean? Trying to get to the front because like there's only 5 spaces available, and there's like absolute carnage. That is clever, but it's still so bloody manipulative. It's
mate, 100%. But it is that it's like you're trying to reduce the action to such a simple action that anyone can do it. It's like think about it. You're trying to think about like all the reasons that someone couldn't do it, so that you can counteract that. Be like, it's like, you can't pay right now. Well, that's fine because you can pay on credit card, or you can pay.
It's called objection handling, and it's one of the things like really good salespeople do in advance. They almost have like a list of all the things that people usually object with. I had a really good one the other day when I went back to Rennes from Stansted. I went to the train station early. I was getting a coffee, and a guy came up to me and was like, "Oh, please, can you spare me some money?" I said, I don't have any change. And then he points at the card machine.
I know.
And I literally went, fucking hell, you got me here, bro. Yeah. I literally just like, okay. I was like, fine, give me a minute. So I ordered my coffee and I went and got my $5. But I was like, this bastard, like he was too good. And then he started, the worst thing is he kept giving me chip. He was like, oh, you look like Michael Owen or something. I was like, shut up. You've got me, okay, already. You don't need to compliment me. Like, for God's sake.
I tell you what, it's interesting because I've had that happen before. I've gone to the cash point and to get like out of $5. And then as soon as I get a bad vibe on the like character note that we were talking about earlier on, I was like, no. Like I remember this guy said, we're like, oh, there's a cash point right here. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Like I happen to have money at the moment or whatnot. I justified it to myself. I took the cash out and the guy was really fucking impatient. And I was like, you know what? No, fuck off. I don't want to.
Yeah, to be fair, I have to say the guy I was speaking to was like he was chatty, he was nice, he was smiling. To be honest, he might not have even been homeless. Like it's such an easy way to make loads of money because it's back to this point of like specific actions. He made me think of a specific action I could take. I tried to sort of avoid it by saying I don't have cash, and he goes, "There's a cash point." I'm like, "Oh, fuck it's just game over." It's like, what else could I say? No, I mean I could. I seem like
the same thing with charities.
Bastard. Like,
yeah. It's like charities. They take it around. There's like portable card machines now. And it's like awkward because they hide it, right? So they hide it because they're waiting for you to be like, sorry, I don't have any cash. And then they're like, don't worry, we've got this.
We talked about this last time, didn't we? It's this idea that you can't say no too many times.
No, twice,
yeah. So, I mean, I guess you could say, I got no money. And then we're like, I got a car machine. Be like, I got no money.
But do you want to admit that you have no money as well?
Oh, yeah, but come on. Like, at this point, not with this, I don't care. That's what I'm going to have to say from now on. The no cash works when there's no,
Yeah. You should just say back to him, can I have a $5?
Yeah. Oh, God's sake. Can you imagine his face? How about you pay me? How about we role reverse? Let's just play this a little bit.
Gosh. Yeah. So then the next bit that is kind of building on this is what the use and abuse of fear appeals. And so whether fear should be used at all, and given the power to like, motivate and direct our thoughts. I can't remember what he said in this as persuaded.
No, I think from this, it was just, I didn't take too many notes. I just took the idea that he was kind of saying, the second bit here is more about, as targets of such appeals, we owe it to ourselves to first ask how legitimate is this fear. So it's more like the use, like he was trying to make sort of an appeal to the propagandist to be like, do we really need to use fear as it's one of the most potent manipulators? And it's funny actually, because there is multiple forms of fear, I guess, in a sense. There's a form of fear which is like life-threatening. But there's also like a sort of fear of like social anxiety, right? And I remember there was a book, I think it's called The Anxiety Makers, and it talked a lot about how a lot of industries have profited from creating anxieties which didn't exist. A bit like the medical tablets creating, disorders or creating illnesses which didn't really exist before. And some of it was stuff like bad breath.
Halitosis,
bringing to the public's consciousness bad breath, which now has obviously made everybody sort of brush their teeth, use Listerine, etc. But it's like, it technically in my head is still a fear-based appeal because it's still appealing to like social fear, like social anxiety. And it's quite interesting because they almost all advertising to a degree use it. You could even say high status products give you the social fear of not being good enough. Do you kind of get what I mean? It like appeals to the part of you that's scared of never being enough. If that makes sense.
But
it's a very potent, propaganda technique in my head. And it doesn't have to be life threatening. In my head, it can be other things like social anxiety. It could be fear of losing something.
It's just tapping into that emotion, isn't it?
Tapping into
multiple different forms.
Because also people are scared of different things, right? Depending upon their context. Like, I'm not scared of having my kid get killed because I don't have a kid. What I mean is the context of your life defines your worries to a degree. Just like, if you're younger and you're more, I guess, sexually active, you're more inclined to be worried about your looks, and you're more inclined to be worried about things which increase your attractiveness to the opposite sex or the same sex, depending what you're into. And then in comparison to when you're older, you're less inclined because you're not on the mating market, let's just say. You have other worries, like, do my kids still speak to me? And then the marketers or the propagandists like technique then is to try and figure out what are the fear, what are the worries, and then like channel in and provide solutions.
In
my head.
No, it makes sense. It's finding out what you value and then introducing fear to that.
Introducing I guess doubt to a degree. Like you're not going to be able to get what you value unless you come buy our service.
Think about the COVID ads. Looking into their eyes, and it's like, you're killing them if you don't wear a mask. Well, it's basically like, are you a murderer? Do you like to think of yourself as a murderer? No, well then do this, right? Because you're introducing.
It brings up some level of dissonance, doesn't it? You know, when you look at it, and you're basically being showed causative action, I guess. But also, I think there's an interesting point to be made, which is because everybody else has seen you see it, it makes you look even worse because they all publicly are conscious that. They are publicly conscious that everybody's been getting the same message, which is if you don't wear a mask, you're killing people. And therefore, you're almost inclined as well to decide what you do because you know everybody else has seen the same message and therefore more likely to label you as a killer. Because if you were the only person who had seen that message, like it was specifically designed for you and you were the only person and you were the only person to see it, it would not change your behavior because you know that nobody else knows that that's apparently what the public consensus is, which is if you don't wear a mask, you're killing people, right? Yeah. Because it was one of the first lines of defense anybody would say. You know, if people were ridiculing people in public, it'd be like, you're not wearing a mask, you're killing people. Yeah. Like it's one of the first things they said. Therefore, you can see that it had a public effect on people's like causative beliefs. But
absolutely.
Let's move on to the next one because the next bit I quite enjoyed, this like Granfalloon technique.
Yeah, the Granfalloons.
So I've got a lot of notes here, but I think the best way of describing it is by creating a label and describing somebody as a label, they then start to associate themselves with that label.
Yeah.
Would you describe it as that way? So like if I met somebody and I was just like, oh, look at us, we're both wearing blue shirts. This is sick. The blue shirt boys. You would think that would have no effect on your mental, feelings towards me, but it's been proven to actually have a massive effect on the way you feel towards people just by like sharing a label with somebody and saying we are these people. Yeah. But I thought it was really fucking interesting because the point being, no matter how random the label was, it had an effect on people.
That was really interesting, wasn't it? It was like that study that they did.
2 blokes, 4 nostrils. What legends?
Yeah, mate, that's the thing. It's like no matter how stupid the category is, it's like as soon as we're in a category with other people, we love it. Unless it's like a category. Well, actually, no. Even if you would,
look at us,
even if you were put in a category, no. But the thing is that like, okay, let's say someone insulted you, right? Yeah. And being like the fat people. Well, the fat people would all like each other. Yes, they may not like the person that calls them fat, but.
I think there's some level of like discrepancy. Like if you're getting called the rapists, like you're not going to be going around like, yes, let's go.
Oh fucking god!
It's not quite the same.
Yeah, no, not quite the same. That's maybe a little stretch. Also, I'm not sure whether rapists are ever all at one place at the same time, like in a little group, like a little posse. Fucking hell.
Yeah, fine. The point being, like, I think I just came up with the blue shirt one on the spot, but I genuinely believe if it was on a night out or something and it was somebody who was in our friendship group who'd said that, like, we're the boys in the blue shirts tonight, I would feel inclined to buy them a drink just because I'm like, we're the blue shirt boys tonight. I'm gonna start doing that next time I'm out. Oh, we're the what else can you do? We're both the guys wearing shorts. I don't know, and I guess anything you pick, which you have a similarity where
Mate, think about how small it is when like someone's got the same name as you, right?
Yeah, of course. But that's a really potent,
yeah.
I was about to say I've never met anybody with the same name yet.
Yeah, I was about to say,
find like a Jesse. I need to find like a Jesse or something.
A Jesse.
No,
but that was a really interesting point, actually. Just how like we love to be part of a group so much to the point where like it can be about anything. We can have any kind of commonality, and it doesn't really matter,
I think another way, I'm just looking at some more of these notes as well. It is obviously you can do random Granfaloons, so like ones we're just talking about. I mean, I guess you could just call them labels. I think maybe Granfaloon for me complicates it a bit too much. There's another point here which I've highlighted, which is about they can also be seen as like aspirational models. So a bit like models again. So some of the Granfaloons here, you can have like young influentials, middle class, where basically you can create labels, let's just say as well, and then assign attributes to it. So I don't know, like let's just say we create a new class of humans. It's called, I don't know, the blue shirt boys. And you create like an image of these blue shirt boys as people who are like sophisticated, refined, and you create like all these sort of traits around the specific label. All of a sudden people aspire to, if they want those traits, let's just put it, they aspire to be these things. And it's just quite interesting because that's kind of, I guess, how stereotypes and how things came to be in the very first place. We gave them a label and then we started throwing loads of associations onto them. But it is interesting. I could be about lots of different things. Like, you know, there's lots of different subsets of things like location based, clothes, you know, there's all these different labels, the different parts of our identity, that could be labeled and brought to the forefront and then created, you know, like a specific style with that label, specific traits associated with that label.
Yeah, no, it's true because you're creating, like, you can also see how it can be used to try and get people to act in certain ways, can't you? Because it's like, oh, we're all in this together. And this is how these kinds of people act, right? Because then it's like people will live up to the label that you attribute them, like you were saying earlier on.
Literally what you're just saying there. So like, we're in this together, right? There's examples here of like Machiavellian office politics was like, we women must stick together, or we are the old guard. We must, or like, no, sorry, we're the newcomers. We must watch out for the old guard. I quite like that because it's like, you've created division.
Yeah.
By literally just saying that. Can you imagine walking into a new job with somebody else, be like, look, we're the new guys. We need to watch out for these olders. Like, you create some level of like camaraderie that you have, like just through labeling. And I can see how that would influence people.
But I think also it's interesting because on the flip side of that, you're also creating an enemy to a degree, aren't you? Because it's like you've got some camaraderie going with someone.
That's the Machiavellian politics, isn't it? Because then you go to this other guy, be like, hey, this newcomer, like, I've been studying this subject for years. That guy doesn't know anything. Do you know what I mean? You say that to the older people, right? You kind of get what I mean? Or there's ways you can try and define the new labels, right? So like, you can go up to like the older guard. I don't know. You could say like, oh, we're the blue shirt boys now. Like that's what you could do. Like,
but it's interesting because I remember reading. I think it was in Coddling of the American Minds, and there was a quote in that, and it was talking about how there was this woman, and she quoted something. It was like, rather than drawing a circle around myself, I draw a circle around us, right? So it's like, why not make a Granfaloon that is more broader and encapsulates everyone? So it's like everyone works at this company, but we don't work at that company, you know? So it's like you're kind of, rather than trying to create rivalry, because naturally it will create rivalry.
Weirdly enough, I quite like the idea of like just going around creating Granfaloons with like individual people based on the things you like. Like, for me, it makes kind of a lot of sense if you want to like bond with anybody. Like, you want to have something that you both got in common, and then you need to just emphasize it and then reiterate it again and again and again between the two of you, to the point where it's like, like we're between us, we're these two people, but we're also more than that. But between us two, we're this.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm starting to think about more and more like just playing out of my mind, and I think it's just super effective. Like, it just makes sense to me how that would work to anybody.
Yeah,
because it also doesn't even have to be nefarious. You can use this in a very like, not in a way to obviously cause trouble, but just in a way to bond with somebody.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just like, even just doing that innocence, or like, oh, we're both wearing blue shirts tonight, we're the blue shirt boys. I'm gonna just throw out to you as Mr. Soho, like, you know, it's that type of thing. Like, if you know, you know, right? It's one of those things that like you start something stupid or funny in the night, and it's become like it's an inside joke, I guess. It's just a form of an inside joke.
Or just it's literally giving a label to a commonality, isn't it? Like, if we met each other,
commonality of experience.
Where you from? Yeah,
commonality experience. Because the Soho thing was more like, we're in Soho, and it's like we all experience that inside joke together, and therefore from that it's become like a thing.
Yeah.
A bit like if I started doing this Blue Shirt Boys now, like it's going to become a thing where like me and you are going to get it, but nobody else is going to get it. So next time I see somebody wearing a blue shirt, I'm like, oh, it's the Blue Shirt Boys. But it's because it's now become like a thing because of the fact it's known between a group.
But that's the thing. And it's like, you'll meet people, you'll naturally come across commonalities that you have. It's just about whether you label it or not, right? Like I could be like, oh, where are you from? And you're like, Bristol. I'm like, Bristol. Oh yeah, I'm from Bristol. That's Bristol Boys, done. You've already created, and that's when you create that Granfalloon, isn't it?
Especially if you like bring it up a few times as well. You can't let it like go, right? In my head, it needs to be repeated. Like
emphasize it. It's got to be part of, it's got to be your relationship identity. Right. As in like the reason why I know you. Okay. I know lots about you, but it's Bristol, it's school.
But the key point, the key anchor point of it is this. Yeah. I like that. It's interesting. That's for sure. Like, if you like, let's say somebody you've newly met and you do create this like Granfalloon label that you both attribute, that will be the anchor point of your relationship in the future, which is almost why it's fun to bring up in the future as well. Because this is the thing we originally bonded over.
Yeah,
it's funny how you can just bond over a word,
we're such simple creatures.
I guess it's bonding over a shared experience. The shared experience being we both get the commonality that we're trying to express here. Like we both get this is a bonding experience. We both agreed to bond over this. Like I guess if you went, oh, we're the Blue Shirt Boys, and the guy looked at you, went, my shirt's green, or said fuck off, it's a bit. Then your attempt at Granfalloon is as well.
Yeah. That's funny.
But yeah, thinking about it now, it's actually it's crazy. I think it's actually a really good thing to do to make friends. I've just decided it's probably one of the best things you can do to make friends than Granfalloon. I'm surprised it's never been taught, like in how to win friends and influence people.
Yeah,
that could actually be number one.
Do they always call it Granfalloons? I don't know whether they just call it.
When he talks about in How to Win Friends, what does he talk about? I guess he talks about trying to find things in common, maybe.
Yeah,
but it's more like. It's more like finding things in common or finding something common in the experience and then bringing it to light and then repeating it in my head a few times to seed it. And then you're friends, like based upon this thing. Because then it becomes an inside joke.
Yeah.
And what are inside jokes but like mutual bonding of an experience that nobody else gets? It's like you against the world. It's your little secret, right? Like that's kind of why I think it's an interesting perspective.
But I think that is like mutual experience is key to it because we can, if I want to tell you about an experience I have, you can only gauge it from your like prototypes of what I talk about, right? So the closest you can get to knowing what I've experienced is literally experiencing the same thing, right?
And also it's quite interesting because we use Mr. Soho as an example. If you explain it to somebody else, they won't even find it funny.
No,
like, you guys are weird. So like, I don't know. I feel like it's interesting. I would love to know if people who listen to this, if I start saying, "Oh, the Blue Shirt Boys," like it'd be like a little conspiracy theory of the podcast. Like it's the Blue Shirt Boys. Like
that's what I mean.
They have the shared experience of us figuring this out. Whereas if I try to explain in retrospectively to somebody, "Oh, me and Tristan were doing this podcast and came up with this Blue Shirt Boys. It's hilarious," or whatever, they'd be like, "What the hell are you guys on about?"
Yeah.
But I feel it's one of those things you have to be there, right? It's one of those moments. Can you hear that, by the way? It's the rain loud on the...
No, I can't. It was fucking pissing it down earlier on, to be fair.
Yeah, it's really going for it. Oh, well. But yeah, that's... that's
Granfalloons.
Granfalloons, labels. We got the defending against the Granfalloon next. So here are 5 simple rules of thumb that might help defending against these labels. So first, be wary of those who attempt to create minimum groups and to define you as a member of a certain category. There are many ways to define and label a person. Ask yourself, why is this particular label being suggested? It's the Blue Shirt Boys. Because you're wearing a fucking blue shirt.
You're wearing a blue shirt, mate.
But it's green. Second,
mate, that's when you've got to double down. You've got to double down. It's like, it's not green, it's blue. That's when I'll rock up and I'll be like, wait, man, you're wearing a blue shirt.
I have to do this. You have to do this. Second, follow the old civil rights motto. Keep your eye on the prize. Try linking your self-esteem to achieve an objective, be it a quality purchase at a reasonable price or a social good rather than maintaining a self-image. Okay, that's interesting to sort of,
So I guess in like the work example, the first one would be like, okay, well, why do I need to be in
the newcomers. Why do I need to be? The
why do I need to be the newcomers? Whereas really, I just wanted to really work well at my job.
Yes.
Right. So that's the main kind of
focusing on the prize and not the social identity of the newcomers.
Yeah.
Third, don't put all of your self-esteem eggs in one basket. 1 Granfalloon might lead to fanaticism. I thought this was a really interesting point.
That's actually really interesting.
Yeah, like I've always thought this, like having multiple identities, multiple interests protects you from negative associations with one of your interests, right? You can just drop it and you're like, I'm not just this person. I'm interested in this. I'm interested in this. I do this. I believe this. Whereas if you just identify with one particular or strongly identify with one specific thing, you're more inclined to like react aggressively to when somebody challenges this thing or speaks badly about it, which I guess you could sort of describe as part of the political system now, where it's part of the belief system has gone up to this massive sort of like equality thing, and where now if you don't believe this stuff, you don't believe in equality, and therefore like you have to believe this whole, I don't know, tree trunk of ideas, which don't always mean equality, but they become sort of one and the same with it, if that makes sense. And everybody's identity is linked with this.
And you end up doubling down, don't you? Because it's like your whole identity is on the line. So are you really going to like jeopardize all of that for what one person is saying? No, you'd probably just find a way to counteract that and double down on your own belief. And like I can see it is actually very interesting that like it will lead to fanaticism if you've only got one kind of identity. One form of identity.
I remember seeing that. I was just thinking it kind of makes sense. It's a classic, like, you know, if somebody attacks that belief or that identity, you lose everything. So it's good to be like,
you're not as invested.
Yeah, I guess so. And then I guess there's also in a weird way as well, as when you have that, like, I guess one sort of like image of yourself that's not open to like being changed. It's the same thing. Like if you have a self-image, just you're so invested in this one specific self-image, and then you do something against it, like your whole life comes crumbling down. It's a bit like the what's that book called? Shattering Assumptions. It's kind of that thing where if you not have like if it's not a flexible self-image or like flexible identity, it's just you're opening yourself up for a world of pain.
Yeah.
If something goes against what you believe the identity to be or yourself to be.
It's really interesting. I'm just thinking about Hitler and being like, so he was in jail, and in jail he wrote his book. Right now, from Influence and this book, we both know that like commitment and consistency. Once you invest in an action, you're more likely to follow through. Right now, in this scenario, he's completely isolated. He's in jail. All right. He's fucking angry about how the First World War went. He's hypothesizing his fucking reason. He's ruminating, and then he's acting on that by first of all, like second of all, in Influence, when they were talking about the prisoner of war inmates and how they got them to write things down because it's commitment and consistency. Well, he literally wrote a whole book on one idea. Like you can see why he was fucking fanatical about it. Because it's just like the only thing that he was doing was investing in that one identity that is like, I fucking hate Jews.
No, 100%. He doubled down on everything about him, had that sort of level of conviction about this is what the way it has to be. This is what I have to do. Yeah, it's interesting.
It'd be fascinating if you were able to see what his outlook on life would be like before prison or before World War One. Oh yeah, probably.
Yeah, of course, it all changed,
and then after, isn't it?
Like, I guess every experience is formative to a degree. I guess there's a point once, like you said, when you commit to a specific direction, and then I guess another thing he had as well is once he committed, he had a lot of people who were supporting him with it, so it made him feel like reinforcing his specific direction and path. And I guess they almost deified him to a degree. And because I guess he almost believed he was the chosen one. Like that's how he got to that level of conviction. He believed he was the one who's doing God's work, right? Like because essentially that's what he did. He believed he was doing.
Crazy. It's like I watched this documentary recently called "The Most Hated Man on the Internet" or something.
Okay.
And it was basically about this guy who, in the early noughties, basically started up like a revenge porn website. Okay, so it basically started as a website where people would like post nudes of others, of like exes and stuff like that. But then it was linked to your Facebook profile and things like that.
Oh my God.
This guy, like, he actually, like, he's disgusting. Like, this guy is actually revolting. The things that he was kind of like, you know, pushing, and like the comments, and he had this like weird kind of cult following, and it was all just like disgusting abuse on this like platform, and people kind of reveled in it, and they'd be like, oh my God, he's so hot, I want him to fuck me, all this kind of stuff. He was seen as like this leader, but this leader like invested in like sparing out like filth. Like, it was just disgusting, the stuff that he was saying.
So weird. There's something about that, like anti-hero, isn't it? Like, that attracts people. It's like that. I think it's back to what we said earlier about like conviction and commitment. You know, obviously the majority think they're mad, but then there's the people who are uncertain, who are inspired by that level of conviction, right? I guess that's almost how cults start to agree. I mean, we're going to talk about it later, which I think we might even have to do a separate 20-minute long podcast on it. I think. But the whole point being, like, when you can create this like persona. And also, I guess, conviction, people just like, it's very seductive. I think the whole, you know, being so convinced of something, because like, I guess doubt to the degree isn't that sexy, is it? Like, like he's still figuring things out. He's not 100% knows where he's going. Where somebody's like, that's it, I'm going there.
But there's
something about it.
It's confidence, like wasn't it?
Yeah,
Like someone who walks to a room who's super fucking confident about something and is willing for people to like argue against him, but actually people end up siding. And it's weird. And it's like, you know, okay, you're committed. There's consistency in your actions towards a certain belief. And then people start to reinforce that belief and put you on a pedestal. Well, that's even more reason to double down, isn't it? And it's like, it's fucking interesting. And I remember when we were reading Evil, it was talking about how the most fanatic are normally the leaders, because it's like you believe in the cause the most, right? As in, like, it's showing the commitment to your cause so much that people, like, you know,
I think so. You can't show doubt. So I remember, what was I watching recently? I was watching a Vice. So obviously, you know my YouTube habits. Like, I like CoffeeZilla, and I like basically people who just watch scams. I just find it so interesting how people take people for rides, and like cults. So one of the ones I was watching recently, I think it could have been Philly on the YouTuber, but it was like the Vice documentary was like the weirdest cult in the world, or one of the weirdest cults in the world. It was just some guy who's quite young, and he had like this like cult following. And if you listen to the stuff he was saying, he just didn't make any sense. He was basically using loads of buzzwords, you know, about finding God, I guess. But the one thing I give to him is, for me, if I was spouting that shit and somebody called me out, I wouldn't be able to like keep a straight face, or like I'd look like, what's the word? I'd be like, not anxious, but I'd be like, fuck me, they've caught me out here, like they've got me. Whereas this guy, they were asking like really, like, for example, one of the things he did with this woman was like, right, it was raining. He's like, right, we're going to will the rain away. We're going to close our eyes. And if you focus hard enough, the rain's going to stop. And obviously it didn't happen. Right. But the man did not, like, he was just like, you weren't focusing hard enough. But like, he said it in a way that's just like, he genuinely, I feel like he believed what he was saying. And there is something about that. I think that you have to have that caliber of person who genuinely believes in that, or like who's basically deluded themselves to the point where nothing can convince them otherwise. Because it was just so weird to see somebody who's like literally so obviously failed, even though he knows he's been camcorder filmed, and still doubles down and goes, like, in what world? But I guess it takes that type of person, right? Like like you said, dedicated to the cause. Almost, I'd say, unembarrassable. Like, they're not even embarrassed about being wrong, because they're so convinced that if they're wrong, it's you that screwed it up. It's not him. Like, he knows he could have done it, but you've messed it up. It's some next level delusion.
It really is. That is, it's so interesting, but I think we went a little bit off. I think we were.
We got to the third bit of the fanaticism.
The third bit. So the fourth bit.
Yes.
So look for common goals. Common ground goals that might be acceptable to both the in and the out groups as a means of reducing the importance of group boundaries. So it was kind of what I was saying in terms of like drawing a circle around you. You find the commonalities between multiple groups, not just the one that you've been assigned.
A bit like the
like it's not just a blue shirt; it's a shirt. You know.
Yeah, we all wear shirts. God damn it.
Yeah. God damn it.
Except if you're a nudist, and then you just naked. 5 is try to think of an outgroup member as an individual, someone who may share more in common with you than you might have previously thought. So with this stuff, I was definitely taking a more jokey line, like some of this stuff where it's like, I think this is trying to help you defend against Granophalloons that are there to be divisive and cause intergroup conflict and tension.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, I was using it when we were speaking about it earlier as more of a bonding technique with people.
Yeah.
But this is more specifically to be used or to defend against when, let's just say, a political group is labeling an enemy, etc., or labeling you as different to somebody else. It's always good to focus on the qualities that are the same.
Yeah.
Like I've always thought it was really interesting. I was thinking about it the other day that one of the first things in every film, I know it's a film, when somebody's about to shoot somebody innocent, they always go, "I've got a family." The thing that's interesting about that is one of the most common, obviously once you have a family, it's the most common, like they get it. Like I have kids. I'm
relatable,
a family. Like it's the first, then they start thinking, oh, like he's got people that depend on him. That's like a common thing about humanity that you can't really ignore. And to be fair, if you then kill somebody after they say that to you, it's pretty like cutthroat. You have to be some special motherfucker to do that. But I just thought it was interesting because that's kind of the point here. Like, you know, like somebody could just stand up and be like, we may all be, you know, with opposite beliefs, but we all have families and kids. Like we all want the same thing here, like the best for our kids, you know, just change the discussion. No,
I agree. Should we continue the rest next time?
Yeah, genuinely.
Make it a 3-part series.
I think the next one will be slightly shorter, but I genuinely think we probably should. So to come up, we've got guilt, we've got diagnosing persuasive communication. We've then got a big talk to where we can talk about this propaganda vis education and selecting stuff as propaganda in quite big depth, I guess. Then we've also got the how to become a cult leader section at the end, which is
fun. We do, don't we?
So that'll be quite fun to go through. That'll be probably about an hour long, I would have thought. That's sweet. Well, good. Until next time.
Beautiful.
3-part series. Let's go. The Blue Shirt Boys. Let's go.
I love that.
All right.
Well, there you have it, guys. The second part to Age of Propaganda. Quite a lot to take in, I know, so if you need a more bite-sized format, don't hesitate to go over to our website and find the book summary there. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to leave us a like or a comment and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on the third part that we will be summarizing next week. We will be covering topics such as guilt and persuasion, propaganda and education, and even how to become a cult leader. So, if that sounds interesting, make sure to tune in next week, but until then, have a good one.